He almost never called me Mary. He called me Mags, like everyone else did. My father used to call me Mary, but he's been dead a long time. Jesus called me Mags. That morning, though, he spoke my name. People say all sorts of stupid things about Jesus and me, always have and probably always will. A genuine friendship between a man and a woman doesn't have to mean they're an item. We were friends, and yes, I love him, and I believe he loves me. But we were not lovers. I'll admit there was a time, or times, I thought about it. It's difficult to be that close to a person without the thought of the physical creeping in. Feeling loved, listened to and understood are genuine aphrodisiacs. I can't tell you if he ever felt the same. He was human. Maybe he did. But he was Jesus. All I can say is that I knew there were boundaries that could never be crossed, mine and his. He was here for a reason, and that reason made some things impossible. Anyway, loads of people loved him and loads of people wanted him, men and women. He kept himself apart. He had to. He gave so much of himself to so many people, and if I was allowed a certain closeness, a friendship that let me see slightly more than some others, then I am grateful. I will never forget. Like Jono, like Kay, like Darren, like so many others he healed or touched or influenced, my life changed the day I met him. I was a mess back then. I'd been a mess for as long as I could remember. I hated myself, and I wasn't that much fonder of anyone else. I'd only gone to listen to him because I was so sick of my mother asking me to. She was probably sick of me being a grump and just wanted me out of the agency for a while. We owned a real estate agency, and we were good. Dad had started it with Mum, and I think they'd both wanted to, but when Dad died early of a stress-related heart condition, Mum went into overdrive. Maybe she felt she had something to prove to him. Maybe she just loved the money. She did love money, and the business made good money. So that's what we did. Even if I hated it. Even if I knew that the only way to ever please her was to show her that I could make money. So I made lots of it. Always trying to get her approval, never managing to, falling apart at the seams without her ever asking what the matter was. Even after the invasion, the business flourished. Yeah, the taxes went up, but people always need houses. Mum had been on my back all week about going to listen to the nice young man who everyone was talking about. I didn't get it. Mum hadn't been in the temple since she got married, and she was about as interested in God as she was in politics. But she knew that something was wrong with me, and I'm sure she'd guessed about the drugs, but she clearly had no desire to talk about it with me. I guess she just hoped that this travelling crazy God fella would sort me out. I'd had another big night, and we'd had another argument, and there was no point me hanging around for more angst. I grabbed my leather jacket and helmet and headed out to the Triumph speed triple I was riding then. I'd had a car, a flash one to impress clients, but it was no fun. My bike was bright orange and loud. Mum hated it, and that was enough for me to make it my preferred form of transport. She'd said he was due to talk to a mob of people at a footy oval up in the hills. That was the other reason I went. The ride up was fabulous. I rode like I didn't care, and I didn't. Speed, risk, fun, fear. That got my heart going. Natural highs. I was a bit stunned when I got there. It was like a pop-up festival. People everywhere. All sorts. Young, old, city folk, rural, invaders, priests, sinners like me. All just sitting and standing, chatting and waiting for something to happen. The ubiquitous coffee van was there, along with a few smart food stalls whose owners had heard there was a gathering. I parked the bike in the shade, whacked my jacket on the ground and sat. The oval was ringed with gum trees, and I remember there were birds everywhere. Magpies, cockies, parrots, kookaburras, in the trees and on the grass. The whole oval was a cacophony of cries and chatter. Then he walked up into the grandstand and stared out at us. It was like someone flicked a switch. The place went as still and silent as the grave. Seriously, even the birds. People had come to listen. Really listen. I had come to scoff. I thought I'd have plenty of ammunition, or at least that's how it seemed when he appeared. Young bloke, like Mum had said. Maybe younger than me, hard to say then. And a bit rough round the edges, like he'd been on the road a bit too long. Looked like a bit of a hick, really. Until he spoke. It wasn't as if his voice was cultured or anything like that. It was kind of normal. But it cut through. And it only took a couple of minutes before you weren't thinking about the voice, but about what the voice was saying. I just sat there, listening and thinking that he was just speaking to me, to my situation. All round me, as I discovered later, hundreds of people were feeling exactly the same thing. He talked about God for sure, but in a way that made crazy sense and offered me a new way of being alive and a complete departure from what I'd been living. I listened for an hour, maybe more. I think that was longer than I'd ever listened to anything in my life before that. ADHD, that was me. Or just restless. But not that day. That day, he moved me and scared me and excited me and worried me. He talked about God as if he knew God personally, in a way that made God more normal than I'd ever imagined, more real. He talked about forgiveness and justice and peacemaking and loving your enemies, and how God's vision for the world would turn everything upside down in a good way, about how those of us who were struggling would be blessed and the world would turn towards goodness if we believed, about how we mattered, about how I mattered. There was a part of me that was still willing to laugh at these ideas. We lived in a brutally occupied land, and we had brutally occupied it long before the latest invasion. Nothing about my life spoke to me of hope. I had the money to chemically induce sleep every night, but I had nothing to wake up for. Nobody to wake up to. I'd resigned myself to short, sharp bursts of pleasure and long, dull days of survival. And yet, as he spoke, it all made sense to me. It was as if he'd opened a door on a new possibility for me, a world, a life in which I made some sort of sense, and maybe I could be loved by someone. By God. By whoever. Every so often he would look my way, directly at me, or that's how it felt. I knew he was probably just scanning the crowd, but I also desperately hoped he did see me. I wanted to be seen, and I was terrified I would be. I sat there with my heart racing and adrenaline surging through me. I sat there long after he finished speaking. I sat there as the sun set and the vans drove away and the crowd dispersed, and all that was left was a grubby group of his mates cranking up the council barbecue and cracking open a few beers. I sat there. Then, there he was, walking towards me with a couple of paper plates of food and a couple of beers. I just gaped. When he sat beside me, I felt everything inside me clamp up. When he said, "G'day." I just stared. "I'm sorry," he said. I thought you looked like you could do with some company. Maybe a chat? Was I wrong?" I swallowed hard. I stilled my breathing. I told myself to stop acting like a teenager on a first date. No, you're good," I said. "No one is good but God," he replied, "but I appreciate it." And he smiled. That was that. That was the moment it all changed. He handed me a plate and a beer, and we started to talk. Mostly him at first, not because he was full of it, but because I was still struggling to get my words together. And then it was mostly me, pouring out my life and my questions and my pain and my... well, pretty much everything. Have you ever been listened to? Really listened to? Listened to without that sense that the person listening is formulating a whole bunch of answers that will fix you right up? I was listened to that night. Listened to without judgment and without any sense of condescension. And when he talked, he spoke about his life and about how he saw the world and about how he understood God, but without ever giving me the sense that he expected me to agree. And then the weirdest thing, I did agree. It was like a pathway opened up for me, and I knew I had to walk, no, run down it, and it would take me home. I know it sounds crazy, but that was the night I saw God for the first time and wasn't scared. Not scared or ashamed or proud or confused. That was the night I first felt as if I belonged in this world and was wanted, loved, understood. There's so much talk about all the miracles he did, about the healings and the exorcisms, but if you talk to most of the people who followed him in those days, they'll simply talk about the way he made them feel welcome and wanted. I wonder if that's not the greatest miracle of all. It was around midnight when I started the bike and rode back down through the hills. I woke Mum and told her I was taking indefinite leave. I packed a bag, slept for a couple of hours and then rode back to the hills. They were just breaking camp. When he heard the bike, he turned and walked over. "We're heading to the Barossa. Don't suppose you've got room for a passenger?" Suddenly having a huge family was weird. Weird but good. They always talk about the boys, but there were plenty of women in the group. As always, we did a lot of the work, a lot of the practical stuff. I was one of the few who had any money, so, along with a few others, we kept us in food and petrol and bail money. There was always someone the cops would pick up. Jesus didn't treat the women any differently. Yes, we get left out a lot of the stories going around, but Jesus didn't write them. All history is subjective, they say, and women have been disappeared from plenty of written records. Maybe the boys who wrote our stories were worried that people would think badly of Jesus for having women be part of the group. To be honest, there are still plenty of folk out there trying to find ways to make him look bad and to exclude women. But day to day, men and women, we were just the gang, the lucky ones who got to travel with him and listen and chat and see the world begin to change, to swing on its axis, to move towards goodness. Jesus loved my motorcycle. There's plenty of stories where he disappears off into the hills or mountains to pray. None of them mention that he was often sitting on the back of the Triumph when he disappeared. Not always, but often. I've never had a better passenger. He'd relax and lean into the corners with me. He'd spread his arms wide and whoop into the night air. He really liked the speed and the wind. And then usually in the middle of nowhere, he'd tap me on the shoulder and indicate that he wanted to stop. He'd hop off and wander into the bush or the scrub or the beach, and that'd be that. I'd watch him go, then kick the bike back into life and head back to the gang. Come morning, I'd ride back, and he'd be waiting. Often as not, he'd be in conversation with someone who'd stop to see if he was okay. As I pulled up, he'd smile and wave, and my heart would skip a beat or two. And then we'd head somewhere for coffee and breakfast, and he'd talk about what he'd heard or seen in the night, what his father had said. That was my special time. The time I had him to myself, and he was calm and open and seemed pleased to share the darkness and the light with me. It was in those moments that we realised that we were friends. I'd never really had a friend like that, and I'm not sure he had either. The next year or so went by like a flash. We were always on the move, and always in the news. My mother stopped talking to me. She said that I was bringing shame to the company name. Note, company, not family. I'd never been happier. I had a real friend. In fact, I had many. We were there when so many of the incredible things happened. We saw Jesus turn his face towards the city and start to really shake things up, and nearly all of us failed to see, or chose to ignore, the building storm. The crowds just got bigger, and the pushback from the authorities just got nastier. Rumours were flying around that there were hit squads out to kill Jesus. But we were so sure that this was it, that somehow he was going to roll over the top of it all and lead us into some sort of brilliant endgame. And of course he did. One that broke my heart in every conceivable way. By the time we got to the city, I thought we were unbreakable. In a week, I learnt that nothing is. The triumphant entry into the city, the trouble at the temple, the politics, the meetings, the threats, the arguments amongst us, the tears, the betrayal, all of it happening, and all of us trying to work out what was going on. None of us were equipped for what happened. None of us imagined anything so brutal and swift and final. None of us but Jesus. Now, afterwards, we remember the hints he dropped, the ideas he spread among us, the clarity of his vision. He tried to tell us, but we hadn't wanted to hear that part of the story. We'd wanted the good times, but we hadn't wanted the truth. I was there when he was arrested. I was never far from him. I watched them hit him and drag him away. I was there when Peter refused to speak up for him. I was there when the military governor put him through that sham trial, offering him up to the people, knowing that he was sacrificing him to the mob. I walked along the road, keeping pace and weeping as he was forced to carry the ladder and face the inevitable. I watched him bleed. I watched him stumble. I watched him fall. I watched on in horror as they nailed him to the tree. I was there when those who had brought this to be laughed and swore at him. I felt a murderous rage more powerful than anything I had ever felt until then. An impotent, murderous rage. I stood with his mother as she watched him die. I stood with my friends, with the women, when most of the men had already fallen away or fled. I felt my body shut down and try to tear itself apart as grief worked its way through every capillary and every nerve end and every breath. I watched the impossible as the light in his beautiful eyes went out, and he cried out in anguish to God, to his Father. And when he stopped breathing, so did I. I literally could not breathe. It was as if my brain had ceased to function, even at the most basic of levels. It was then that his mother turned to me and shook me and spoke words that brought me back to myself. She said, "He still needs us. Nothing has ended. Nothing is finished. Believe." I'll never be sure of the exact sequence of events after that. Everyone has a story and they're all a bit different. What I know is this. We refused to leave the body. They tried to get rid of us, but we weren't going anywhere without him. Without him. They were all scared. It hadn't gone as they'd hoped. Even the soldiers weren't going to touch him after what had happened. The eclipse, the news from the temple. Some of them were kneeling at the tree and shedding tears with us. One of our secret backers, Joseph, who'd kept out of the headlines and maintained a high-profile job, went to the governor and begged for Jesus' body. I have no idea why he chose that moment to blow his cover, but I know that it worked. The governor gave him permission to take Jesus down. He and Nick must have known that they could never go back to their normal lives after what they did, but they came to us and brought ladders, and they, as gently as they could, brought him down to us. They laid his body in his mother's arms, and still she believed. Then Joe and Nick took him, and Joe put him in his own tomb. Me? I looked at the face of my best friend. It was covered in blood and lacerations. His eyes, those eyes that had looked into mine and seen someone no one else had even imagined was there, were closed. I placed a hand on his chest, but there was no movement, no breath. He was gone. The man who'd given my life back to me was gone. I ran. I headed for my bike. I kicked it into life. I rode for the hills. I rode fast and wild and without fear, because when you have no reason to live, death is a joke. But my bike missed him almost as much as me. I was so used to him riding pillion on my bike and in my life that I'd forgotten how lonely it is riding solo. I stopped and screamed and had a conversation with God that I deeply regret. At a minute to midnight, I arrived back at the house we were staying in. From the first minute of the next day, a curfew had been added to the normal restrictions. We sat together, too scared to speak in case we fought or collapsed. No one slept. The weight of it was palpable. Shame filled the rooms. His mother cooked and made us eat. Everything was broken, except her. First thing Sunday morning, she tapped me on the shoulder and motioned for me to follow. She and her sister led me through the silent streets of the pre-dawn world without a word. We arrived at the tomb and saw the soldiers guarding it. As we approached, they raised their guns, gesturing for us to leave. They looked terrified, but not as terrified as they looked the next minute, when a ball of fire struck the ground where they stood, and the door of the tomb burst open. The light formed itself into a being of living light, at least 12 feet tall, and laughing. The soldiers dropped their weapons and lay flat. The being spoke to us. "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his friends. He has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you. You will see him. Now, I have told you." He looked down at the soldiers, stamped a foot, and they ran for their lives. We went to the tomb and saw that it was empty. No Jesus, just the cloth that Joe and Nick must have wrapped him in. His mother fell to her knees and began to pray. Her sister held her. I ran. Again, this time I was running too, not away. I ran to the gang and slammed open the door. I woke them all. I babbled. I told them Jesus wasn't there, that the tomb was empty, that maybe. Most of them just looked at me, as if I'd snapped. As if it had all been too much for me. As if it hadn't been too much for us all. But Peter listened. And the other one, who had always been so close to Jesus, who had always been so loyal, the one who had loved him as much as I had, the one who Jesus had loved as much as he had loved me, the only one I'd ever been jealous of, and he of me. We ran back, passing his mother on the way. She was beaming. At the tomb, Peter, of course, rushed in. He came out looking confused. The other looked in and turned to me. His eyes were a question to which I didn't have a clear answer. And I began to worry, to imagine other possibilities. I had been so sure, but that one look, that trusting, hopeful look undid me, and I began to cry. Again. They ran back to tell the others what I had already told them, to mansplain the truth, to confirm the mystery. I walked to the tomb and looked inside. Through my tears I saw two smaller, gentler beings of light, sitting where Jesus' body must have been laid. They spoke to me. "Woman, why are you crying?" I said, "They have taken my friend away, and I don't know where they have put him." They just smiled back at me with such kindness and love that I burst into tears again. Turning, I saw another person, but my eyes were blurry with the tears, and I just assumed they worked there. He asked, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" I said, "Sir, if you have carried Jesus away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And then he said my name. He said, "Mary." My heart exploded. I wiped my eyes. It was him, alive, who was dead. It was my friend and my teacher and my saviour and my guide. I'm not ashamed to say that I leapt at him and held him tight enough to drive the breath out of him again. I wept tears and snot and joy into his shirt, and I kissed his face. I can tell you that he was no ghost. He was substantial. He was real and alive. Finally, he took my arms and held me away from him, both of us able to breathe again. He spoke, and his voice was the final proof that I wasn't hallucinating. It was his breakfast voice, the voice I had learned to love and respect. "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to our gang and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And then he looked at me, and those eyes were alight again with the light of eternity. He looked at me with such boundless and generous love. He looked at me, and I knew that everything was well again, and he smiled for me as a single tear rolled down his face. That was my tear on his face. I reached and wiped it with my finger and placed it on my tongue. Then I did as he asked and went to tell the others that he was alive. There are so many stories about people seeing Jesus before he left. Some of them are even true. The moment with Tom was beautiful. The look on Tom's face when he realized that it really was Jesus. The pure joy. I'll always remember that. just as I'll always remember our last ride. Jesus came and asked if we could go up into the hills again. When he tapped me on the shoulder, I was ready to drop him off and come back the next morning, but he asked me to park the bike. He'd brought a picnic. We sat in a clearing in the bush and laughed and talked, and I tried ever so hard not to ask him to explain it all, and he made no attempt to. All around us, birds filled the trees and shrubs. We drank new wine and ate fresh bread and good cheese. I knew then that he was leaving. Neither of us spoke of it. Sometimes it's better just to be in the moment. I took the long way home, as he leant into the corners and laughed aloud, and I broke the speed limit. And when we got back, he held me tightly and whispered, "Thank you." And then, not long afterwards, he was gone. They keep trying to make the people believe that he's dead. But there are too many of us, and there are always more joining the gang. In cities and towns everywhere, the rumour that death has been defeated by love is spreading. Despair is being turned into hope, fear into joy. There's nothing easy about it, and we're being targeted everywhere we go. But the thing he said most after that wonderful morning stays with us all. Be not afraid. That's what my friend asked me to do. So I'm trying. I will not be afraid. I have seen the Son of God rise from the tomb. I have seen my friend smile again. I will tell our story until they stop me. And after me, there will be more to take my place. People who know they matter. People who are unafraid to speak his name. People of the resurrection.